This is Trial Transcripts Exposed by Crime in Court with Heather. Raw courtroom reads with my commentary. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Crime in Court with Heather. This is Trial Transcripts Exposed, reading through the Menendez brothers' trial. And we are in the defense's case, and Erik Menendez is on the stand. This is defense's case part 61. And before we get right back into it, so they broke for their lunch on January 4th and 1995. We're going to continue where we left off there. But before we do that, I would like to thank our founding justice insiders, Toyota Girl 67, SLB 29488. May the force be with you 4313. Jessica Wynand 6079, Mrs. Apples 2007, Butler 89833, Brooke JF, Jen P 773, Boom Chicka Wow Wow 1, and Kendall B 5757. Thank you all for being founding justice insiders. You too can be a founding justice insider if you join between now and June 30th as a justice insider, the justice insider tier of membership on my channel. You will become a founding member permanently for being, your name will be read, or in the future, if it gets to be way too big, I will get rolling credits and everyone's handles will be on the screen. So thank you, founding members, for being here. And I believe that perk is for all members, get to be on the wall of fame, and only the Justice Insiders will be read on camera. So just letting you know, there's two tiers in case you are wondering. So there's a core Justice Insider for 99 cents and the Justice Insider for $2.99. And again, if you join that now between June 30th, you too can be labeled or designated a founding Justice Insider. All right, with that being said, let us go to our main content. Here we are, like I said, Erik Menendez is on the stand in the Menendez brothers retrial, 1996, January 4th, 1996. And the court says, in the trial, without the jury present, is there anything you want to discuss before we have the jury out? Mr. Khan says, yes. There is one area that I indicated to the court earlier today that we intend to question the defendant with regard to. It was an area that the defense highlighted in their motion as an area which constitutes a denial on the part of the defendant, and we indicated that we are not going to be questioning him regarding areas in which he denied making particular statements to Dr. Oziel. However, in regard to this one statement in particular, the defendant acknowledges that he made a statement something like that. So, although he says, I didn't make that statement, I made a statement something like that, we intend to ask him about that statement or that question. And the court says, which one was that? Mr. Khan says, this is on page, Mr. Levin says, 16981 at line 24. It's in volume 101. The court asks, in your motion? Is this in your motion? Where is it in your motion if it is? Ms. Abramson says, I don't have the motion in front of me. Mr. Khan, do you have the motion in front of you? No, I don't, says Mr. Khan. Ms. Abramson says, Judge, why don't we just show you the transcript? It's not that hard to figure out. Court says, thank you. Ms. Abramson says, even for you, Judge, I didn't mean that. Court says, I get the message. Ms. Abramson says, it's the very bottom. It starts at line 24. I'm sorry. Court says, okay, what is the objection? Mr. Levin says, well, the objection is that it's a denial of the question posed, and for the witness to then say, I said something like that without knowing what it was that he said, to be confronted with a very prejudicial question is unfair, and it would just create confusion in the minds of the jurors that he was adopting that particular question when he said, no, he didn't make that statement. Court says, well, he said, no, I said something like that, but I didn't say that. Of course, the punctuation is that of the reporter and not the witness. Yes. Mr. Gusser says the other problem with the question, Your Honor, is it's a compound question. It's, did you tell Dr. Oziel that your mother had locked the doors in the bedroom and that your mother and father had sensed that you were capable of murdering them? And he said, no, I said something like that. We don't know if it was part one, part two, an amalgamation, or what it was. It is the danger of a compound question going in, but the answer was basically no, at least to the compound question. So I think that our objection should stand. Court says, well, the problem with that is that there was no objection to the question that was asked. Ms. Abramson says, and there was a follow up to find out which part he said something like that and which part he didn't. That's the problem. We could make an offer of proof as to what he meant. Court says, well, it seems to me that the nature of the statement, this is the November the 2nd conversation about which the defendant has testified, and this is not one of those. This is not the October 31st conversation, which contains a great deal of material to which the defendant denied making the statements he denied making in his testimony at the first trial. This is just one discrete inquiry in the next session, November the 2nd. I agree with you that it is a compound question. However, the defendant certainly can explain it. I don't see how it's prejudicial by the question being asked. It goes to the state of mind and he can explain it. Mr. Levin says, well, court says he certainly has shown no reluctance to give lengthy explanatory answers, often non-responsive to questions that were asked in these proceedings. Mr. Levin says, well, the court says, so now we're in a situation where he gave a very brief answer and the people want to explore it and find out what he meant. Mr. Levin says, well, I could agree with the court if it was something more mundane, but this goes to the very heart of the case and to an extent, to an element of intent. It goes to the very charges before the jury about whether or not Erik Menendez felt his parents were capable of murdering him, even using the word murder and the way that the question is phrased in the compound sense. We don't know what it is that he was referring to when he said, I said something like that. I don't think just because there wasn't an objection in the first trial that should bar us or preclude us from raising the objection at this time. Mr. Khan could not ask that question in this trial, so he should not be allowed to ask that, which he could not ask in, at least wasn't objected to in the first trial. He shouldn't be allowed to do it in this trial. If he asks that question exactly the same way, there would be a sustained objection on the fact it's compound. Ms. Abramson says that's how he has to ask it. He can't refer to it as prior to testimony. So they don't want to say that he testified before. They don't want to say that Craig Signorelli testified before. They're very evasive about what happened in the first trial for whatever reason. Abramson says that's how he has to ask it. He cannot refer to it as prior testimony. Court says, all right. It seems to me that this is an area that was discussed in the interview with Detective Zoller and again brought up during the examination of the defendant on October 6, 1993, and the only additional factor is the question of whether or not the defendant believed that his parents sensed that he, the defendant, was capable of murdering them. Ms. Abramson says that's the part we're concerned with. The court says, I understand that. I understand. Mr. Levin says, and the court says, he said no. I don't see any prejudice in that question being asked. I don't see how it's prejudicial. Ms. Abramson says, because he's going to say no again and they can't prove it because they don't have Oziel under subpoena. The court says, he said no and you're going to follow up and he's going to follow up. And I think that's appropriate examination. I don't see this as opening the door or bringing out other statements that he testified to by Oziel, but were denied by the defendant, and I don't see that this is broaching a subject that in any way relates to what we were talking about, and in the argument that related to Signorelli and the cases cited by each defendant, Lo Signo, and all of the other cases, it's entirely different. Since the defendant in his testimony in his first trial said, I said something like that, That is to me more than a denial. Mr. Levin says, well, the point is what he did say that sparked in the imagination of Mr. Kuriyama to phrase the question in that way. Prejudicial impact is not from the answer, it's from the inquiry from the question, and that will flow from whatever it is Erik Menendez says. And then I am certain that Mr. Khan is going to use that question that he asks to ask many more questions to try to highlight or create an inference that Erik Menendez did in fact say that to Dr. Oziel when he didn't say it to Dr. Oziel, and we'll never know what it was that caused Mr. Kuriyama to feel that it was said. If they have evidence that he said it, I think that might be the next step, but the prosecution has no evidence at all that Erik Menendez made that statement. The court says, well, except we have his answer. I said something like that. I think that's a sufficient good faith basis for the inquiry. I don't see it going to the lengths that you have envisioned in your argument. I don't see it as being an area of prejudice at all. All right, the objection then is overruled. Mr. Gessler says, I would like the record to show that Lyle Menendez joins in the objection, Your Honor, on his behalf and on all constitutional grounds I have previously advanced under Lo Signo and the related cases in the 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments. The court says, yes, the court should clearly indicate that this is an objection by Lyle Menendez as well. Let's get the jury out, says the court. And now we will resume with cross-examination. Court says everyone is back. Mr. Khan says, thank you. You were testifying this morning, Mr. Menendez, that you went to see Dr. Oziel on October the 31st. Is that correct? Yes. And when you met him that day, did you admit that you killed your parents? Yes. How did that come about? It came about through him not understanding why I couldn't live with myself, and I realized that if I didn't tell him, I wouldn't be able to get any help. So at that point, I told him. We went for a long walk, and I told him on the walk. So did you go there that day intending to tell him? No. And you went in and you told him that you couldn't live with yourself? Yes. And he asked you why you couldn't live with yourself. Is that correct? Right. There was a lot more to it, but that's essentially correct. And you tried to explain to him why you couldn't live with yourself, is that correct? It unless I wasn't able to. He wasn't understanding, and of course, he didn't know what I had done at that point. And so at that point, I asked to go for a walk and eventually told him that I had been responsible. Well, what made it so difficult? What were you saying to him that made it so difficult for him to understand? That he didn't understand why I couldn't live with myself, why I had dreams of dying and was happy when I was dead, and why I felt like the lowest person on earth. He didn't understand why I would feel that way if my parents just died and didn't have anything to do with it. He wasn't getting it. Are you saying that he wasn't able to do so because he kept asking you why you were having these feelings? I don't remember if he was asking that question specifically, but that's what we were talking about. So, what caused you to conclude that he wasn't able to understand those feelings? Essentially, him saying that he didn't understand those feelings. And he wanted you to explain, he wanted you to give a reason why? Right. Dr. Oziel was a man who was very much concerned about the motivation for things. Is that correct? Mr. Levin says, objection calls for speculation. The court says, sustained. Mr. Khan asks, did Dr. Oziel want to know the reason for your feelings? No, he just said that. I don't remember what he said. I just know that it wasn't getting across. That did it appear that why I couldn't live with myself, and the only way was to tell him. Did it appear to you that Dr. Oziel wanted to know the reason for your feelings? Of course. And that didn't come as a surprise to you because that's what psychologists want to do is get to the reason for these things. Is that correct? Calls for speculation or calls for conclusion and speculation, says Mr. Levin. The court says Goes to his state of mind and his opinion at the time. You can answer the question. Eric says, I don't know what you mean by that's what psychiatrists do. I don't know what they do. At that time, he wasn't getting, there was no way for him to get it unless I explained it to him. And I had realized I had already been talking to him. It took about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to that point, and that's when I decided to tell him. Was he asking you questions during that time period? I'm sure he was. What type of questions was he asking you? Well, I was talking about other things. He was asking questions about what I had done in the last 2 months. I told him about college. I told him about tennis. I told him about what I was losing a lot, that I was losing a lot of weight because of the guilt. Well, actually, I didn't say guilt. I just said I was losing a lot of weight. He wasn't understanding where I was mentally, why I would be there, and so I realized that I had to tell him. You get the impression that he was trying to put together the reason why you were having those feelings. Right. We were going through what the reasons could be, and it was clear that he was suggesting that, maybe just seeing my parents dead was what caused it. You would say that he was exploring possible reasons with you? Yes. And did that appear to you to be a concern of his to get to the reasons for your feelings? Right. And you were trying to help him understand the reasons for the feelings, is that correct? Yes. And you felt that to explain it to him, you had to tell him that you killed your parents, is that correct? Yes. So you went for a walk and you told him that you killed your parents, is that correct? Right. And then he said to you, why, Mr. Menendez, why did you kill your parents? No. No? No. What did he say when you said to him that you killed your parents? I said, "We did it." And he said that he suspected that I had done it and he needed me to tell him that, and that I was going to have to tell him that I couldn't live with that thought and that knowledge and not tell somebody. And he told me that he had already suspected that I had done it, which made me feel a good sense, which made me feel good in a sense that he was saying those things. And after he said that to you, did he say to you, "Now tell me the reason why you killed your parents"? No, not at that point. At what point did he say to you, "Tell me why you killed your parents"? Back in the office, I believe it was after he called Lyle. And when he asked you, "Tell me why you killed your parents," what did you tell him? I told him that I didn't know why. I wasn't expecting the question, and at that point, he had called Lyle, and I realized that I shouldn't have told him. This is the first place. I shouldn't have told him this in the first place because now he was bringing Lyle into this, and I hadn't told Lyle that I was going to go to Dr. Oziel. So Lyle didn't know that I was confessing to him, and so I told him that I didn't know why, and then we explored it. Well, after you told him that you had killed your parents and he asked you why, and you said, I don't know why, what did Dr. Oziel then do to ascertain why you killed your parents? Talked about my parents, how I felt about them, the relationship that I had with them, and trying to wiggle his way down to why, I guess. I don't know. Are you saying, Mr. Menendez, that when you told him, I don't know why I killed my parents, Dr. Oziel didn't follow up with a question like, well, what do you mean? Why didn't you don't know why? Why did you squeeze the trigger and kill your parents? No. In fact, he said just the opposite. When I said I didn't know why we were talking and I was telling him about my relationship with my parents, and he was saying, I understand that you don't know why. I would be surprised if you knew why. He was telling me that he felt that we needed to do hypnosis and go back and relive the feelings. He knew my parents, and so he knew some of the relationship. So what you're saying, Mr. Menendez, is that as soon as you said, I don't know why, Dr. Oziel accepted that at face value and no longer asked you, why did you kill your parents, Mr. Menendez? Objection. It's argumentative, and the court says it's argumentative as phrased. Mr. Khan says, at any time during the rest of the day, did Dr. Oziel ask you in any way, why did you kill your parents? Right. We were discussing it for 10 to 15 minutes before Lyle got to the office, but it wasn't the way that you're characterizing it. You mean he never put the words to you, "Why did you kill your parents?" a second time? I'm sure that he did. I don't know. I am sure that he did. We were trying to discuss why. I realized that I shouldn't have told him these things, and I wasn't prepared. Objection. Non responsive. The witness has answered the question, says Mr. Khan. Court says, all right, the answer will stand, but ask your next question, please. Mr. Khan says, when you say that you are sure that he did, why do you say that you are sure that he did? Only that we were discussing it for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I shouldn't say I'm sure he did. We were discussing that issue, and so it wasn't as though he left it alone. He understood that these were difficult things to talk about. I was crying at the time and I was hysterical, and it was a difficult time. It wasn't something where he just said, you should know the answer. He was saying, I understand that you don't know why, and we need to explore it. Did it strike you as curious, Mr. Menendez, that this mental health worker never followed up with the most obvious question, why did you kill your parents? Objection, argumentative. The court says, are you asking his state of mind now? No, says Mr. Khan, at the time, Your Honor. Court says, rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, yes. Did it surprise you, Mr. Menendez, that once you simply said, I don't know why Dr. Oziel never followed up with the question, why did you kill your parents one more time? I'm not saying that at all. I'm trying to tell you what happened, and how you're characterizing it is not what took place. Well, you just told us that he never used those words again. Is that correct? No, I didn't say that. I said we spent 10 or 15 minutes trying to explore that and why. And so he used those words again. Why did you kill your parents? I don't know that he used those exact words. So, what did he say after that in this exploration as you describe it? We talked about my relationship with my father, my relationship with my mother, and what he knew about them in the sessions that he had had with them. We talked about the fact that we needed to go in depth into the reasons why, and that it was probably very complicated, and we were going to have to do that. And that's it. He wanted Lyle to be a part of it, and Lyle was coming over, and I was more worried at that point about what I was going to tell Lyle and how I was going to tell Lyle that I had told Dr. Oziel without first telling Lyle that I was going to do it. He was worried that Lyle was going to be mad at him. Well, Mr. Menendez, after you telling him about your feelings and him telling you about what he knew about your parents, at what point then did Dr. Oziel get back to the issue of why did you kill your parents, Mr. Menendez? November 2nd. You're saying that on October 31st, at no time later after the arrival of your brother, did Dr. Oziel ever turn back to the question of why did you kill your parents, Mr. Menendez? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we discussed that and a lot of the issues around it. We never got back to the substance of it. That didn't happen. We didn't have time. We probably would have taken 30 hours to do that. I lived 18 years with my mother and father. We had 10 minutes, 15 minutes before my brother got there. I was thinking about Lyle and we were talking about it. And once Lyle got there, the session pretty much ended. And we went back to him on November 2nd. Mr. Menendez, are you saying it would have taken 30 hours for you to say to Dr. Oziel, I shot my parents because I thought they were going to kill me? What I'm saying is that when I say that, then where does that go? That goes to why does he think they were going to kill him, and where does that go? That goes to the sex between Dad and I. That was not something I was ready to talk about. So are you saying you wanted to take 30 hours to get to that issue? What I'm saying is it It has taken years of therapy for me to fully understand all of the components, and I am not sure I even do, and probably never will. Obviously, I understand that was present in my mind at the time, but there's a lot more to it, I am sure. And so, what I'm saying is that it's not something I wanted to talk about. I didn't go there to talk about why. And are you saying that Dr. Oziel gave you the impression that he was going to take 30 hours before he got back to the question of why did you kill your parents, Mr. Menendez? No, that's not what I'm saying. You're saying that Dr. Oziel just started beating about the bush and talking about feelings you had around your family without ever getting to the issue of why you killed your parents? Objection, argumentative, sustained. Mr. Khan asks, now, he called up Lyle Menendez on the phone. Yes. Did he tell you why he was calling up Lyle on the phone? Yes. What reason did he give you for calling up Lyle? He asked me if Lyle knew that I was there, and I said that Lyle did not. He asked me if I was planning to tell Lyle, and I said I hadn't thought about it. I wasn't sure if I should tell Lyle. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. He said, well, how am I going to tell Lyle? And I said I hadn't thought about it. And he said, well, I am going to call Lyle and tell him to come over right now. And it was at that point that I was beginning to realize that maybe I had made a mistake. And he called Lyle on the phone, told Lyle I was in his office and he needed to talk to Lyle, that he didn't want to do it over the phone and for Lyle to come in to his office right away. And did Lyle come to his office? Yes. How long did you and Lyle remain in his office together? Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. And was at the end of the session that day after 10 minutes? Right. Left crying at one point. Lyle was saying that he wanted to talk to me about that what was going on, and Lyle and Dr. Oziel walked down to my Jeep where I was and arranged to go back on November 2nd. Now you trusted Dr. Oziel enough to tell him that you killed your parents, is that correct? Right. And you felt that that was one of the most important secrets in your life, the fact that you killed your parents, didn't you? It was a secret that I needed to express, but it wasn't. It certainly was obviously one of the most important secrets, of course. And you entrusted him so much that not only did you tell him that you had killed your parents, but you trusted him enough to tell him that your brother had also killed your parents with you. Is that correct? Right. Did you trust him enough to tell him where you had purchased the shotguns? I know I did tell him where I purchased it. He asked me what did the police know, and he wanted to know. Mr. Khan says I would object, non-responsive. The question has been answered. Court says sustained. The answer is stricken. Mr. Khan says, now, why did you tell him where you had purchased the shotguns? I think he asked me where we got the guns. When did he ask you that, Mr. Menendez? On October 31st. He asked you where you purchased the guns? That this was very detailed conversation, wasn't it, Mr. Menendez? Objection, argumentative, sustained. At what point in the conversation did he say, where did you purchase the guns? Just before he called Lyle. How long did you talk to blah, blah, blah. Let me start again. How long did you talk with him about the killings before he called Lyle? From the time we were outside of his office on the street, about maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes. You're saying only 10 or 20 minutes elapsed from the time that you told him that you killed your parents up until the time that he called Lyle. Right. Tell us everything about the crime that you told him in that 10 to 20 minutes. Objection, Your Honor, that calls for a narrative. Overruled. The witness says, it's hard to remember what I told him before versus after he called Lyle, but I told him that we had purchased the guns down in San Diego and that we used one of my brother's old best friend's licenses. I told him that we wanted to go, or that he wanted to know why the police hadn't arrested us, and I told him that I wasn't sure why. I didn't know what evidence there was. I told him that he asked what had happened in terms of the killing, and I told him that we had run through the doors and started shooting. I told him that afterwards we waited for the police to come and they didn't come. I told him that we picked up the shells. I believe I told him that we, at that point, what had happened in terms of trying to create an alibi that we had gone to the movie theater, that we had dropped off the guns. I told him just various facts. He wanted to, it's at that point, I believe it was at that point, it might have been before, it went into his mind. He asked me, "Does Lyle know you're here?" Well, you told him, what was your reason? You told him, well, what was your reason for telling him where you had purchased the guns, Mr. Menendez? He asked. He was asking you questions about this crime, wasn't he? Yes. He wanted to know the details about this crime, didn't he? Objection calls for speculation. Rephrase the question. Did it appear to you that he wanted to know the details about the crime, Mr. Menendez? Same objection, Your Honor. Overruled. Mr. Levin says also calls for a conclusion. Overruled. I guess, says the witness. Mr. Khan says, so he didn't immediately jump into a discussion where he said, "Let me tell you how I feel about your mother, and you can tell me how you feel about your parents," did he? No, right. What I wanted to talk about right after I told him I did it was why I no longer wanted to live. And he said, "We'll talk about that later. We'll deal with those issues later. Tell me, where did you get the guns? What happened? Why haven't the police arrested you? Why are you here in my office and not in jail?" These are the things he wanted to know what the police knew. He had very detailed questions for you, is that correct? No, he want objection calls for speculation. It's argumentative. Overruled. The answer will stand. Did you finish your answer? Asks the court. No, I haven't, says Erik. By the end of that day, he thought that I had purchased the guns on the same day. I mean, I was just spieling out things as I was crying, and it was emotional. And whenever I talked about the killings at that point, I got very emotional, and he was asking questions, and I was just spitting out answers, but it wasn't very organized. You told him that you had run through the doors of the den to kill your parents, is that correct? Yes. Okay, now was that because this is something that you volunteered, or was this in response to a question he was asking you concerning how the shooting actually took place? Right. I believe that's what it was. I'm sorry, which? How the shooting took place. The court says this was in response to a question of his. The witness says, I believe so. Mr. Khan says, and you told him, did you tell him that you went through the doors first? Probably. Is this something that you volunteered to him, or is this because he asked you about the specifics of entering the room? He wanted to know how the shooting occurred. And you explained it to him in detail, is that correct? I explained to him the facts that I could bear to tell him. But yeah, I told him about the shooting. I told him that I had run through the doors. I told him about the darkness in the room. I told him that I saw my dad standing there. I told him essentially the same things that I have testified to here. As extensively as you testified here? Obviously, not as extensively. I've testified here for 2 weeks. Well, and you told him that you started shooting first. I'm not sure. Directing counsel's attention to volume 100, page 16878. Line, says Mr. Levin. Mr. Khan says line 9 through 13. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, there is an objection to that passage. It's not inconsistent. It's not impeaching. The court says, okay, I would like to see it. The lines again, 9 through 13, says Mr. Levin. The court says, I think you'll have to lay a better foundation before that question can be asked. Objection sustained. Mr. Levin says, just one moment, sir. I can't think when I'm walking. It's inherited. Thank you. Don't know what that meant. Okay, Mr. Khan says, did you tell Dr. Oziel that you first entered and you started shooting? I may have. If you can show me what you have in front of you, I can tell you. Yes, sir. Did you tell Dr. Oziel that you don't know who you shot and your brother followed behind you and he shot at whatever he shot at? Right. And you told Dr. Oziel that you picked up the shells afterwards? I think so. I think so. And was that something you volunteered, or is that in response to a question that he asked concerning the details of the shooting? His question was, "What did I do after the shootings? Why didn't the police arrest us?" I told him that the police had not come. I told him that I had sat on the stairs and that Lyle came over to me, and eventually we decided to leave and we picked up the shells, and I think I told him all of those things. And did you tell him that you also changed your clothing after the shooting? I think I told him that I changed my pants when I because I saw small red dots on them. Was that in response to a question from him, or was that because this was something that you volunteered? I was just rambling on. I was crying and I was just spewing out facts, and I am not sure he asked a specific question for every answer I gave for everything I told him. You told him that you purchased the guns in San Diego? Right, he did ask where we got the guns. You told him what type of guns you had? Shotgun. And did you tell him where you dropped off the guns? Probably, I would imagine I did. Why did you tell him where you dropped off the guns? I don't know why. I was just telling him what had happened, and so I probably did. Probably did. Was that in response to a question from him? I don't think I don't think his questions were coming across very clearly to me. I was crying, sobbing, and I was just telling him what had happened. He was saying what happened next. I don't remember what he said, just remember spewing out facts. Do you remember Dr. Oziel told you that the guns were in an unsafe place? At some point, we talked about it. I don't believe it was then. I believe my brother was there. He said that the ocean is a bad place to bury guns and the desert is a good place. I specifically remember him saying, who said that? Lyle said that. And I specifically remember him saying that the ocean is bad, the desert is good, and he suggested that we go get the guns and move them to the desert so that the people or the police would not eventually find them. You told him about the phony identification that you had used to purchase the guns? I think I said I used a friend of my brother's ID. Did you express to him any concern that the guns might be traced? Yeah, I told him that there were video cameras in the store monitoring us when we bought them, and that if the police knew where the guns were from, I thought everything was on a statewide computer that they could just punch that up, and that's probably how the police would arrest us when they located the guns. There's no idea how any of that works. I don't purport to know any of that either, but it's kind of like a nice, cute, innocent, naive way of thinking how the world works. Did you discuss with him your effort to put together an alibi for that night? Right. I told him that we had tried to get tickets, but we were unable to do so, so we couldn't give those to the police. And in all of this time, as you were speaking to him, Mr. Menendez, did you ever say to him, "And the reason I shot my parents is because I thought they were going to kill us"? No, I didn't. Can you tell us, Mr. Menendez, why you were willing to give Dr. Oziel so many details concerning this incident and not tell him why you had killed your parents? Objection, argumentative, overruled. Erik says, because I had a need to tell him what I had done. I had a need to tell him that I was responsible for this and that I couldn't live with myself and the guilt was too overwhelming for me not to tell people, and I wanted to tell people. But I did not feel that the need. I did not feel guilt or desire in any way to talk about what my father and I had done together, what I had allowed to happen, and all of the facts about the sex. I simply wasn't going to go into it. I didn't want to go into it. And I wasn't there to tell him why I killed my parents. I didn't even go there to tell him that I did. And I realized as the conversation was going on that I had gone too far, that Lyle was going to be hurt, and that I shouldn't have been there in the first place telling him these things. Mr. Menendez, I'm not asking you about you telling Dr. Oziel about the allegations of molestation. I am asking you about whether you felt any need whatsoever to tell Dr. Oziel that the reason why you killed your parents was because you believed you were acting in self defense. I saw them as the same. I didn't think in terms of self defense, but I saw them as the same. I killed my parents because of that reason. I didn't see them as separate. Mr. Menendez, why didn't you see the details of the shooting as being the same as why as the fact that you killed your parents as a result of the fear that you were in? There's a big difference in terms of why something happened versus what happened. I mean, I didn't feel that telling him how the shooting happened meant that I was going to have to get into the sex. I just didn't connect that. So, did you tell Dr. Oziel, well, we were just hanging around my house and then we decided to burst into the room and shoot my parents to death? No. Tell us what you told Dr. Oziel about the moments preceding the moment that you burst into the room and shot your parents to death. We never discussed it. He never asked you about that? He never asked me. Did you find that odd, Mr. Menendez, that you're giving him all these details about the crime and this mental health worker didn't ask you why did he run in the room in the first place, Mr. Menendez? Objection, argumentative. The court says, as phrased, it is. Objection sustained. Mr. Khan asks, at that time, did it strike you as odd that Dr. Oziel did not ask you why you went into the room? Objection, it's irrelevant. Overruled. The witness says, it didn't strike me as odd. I wasn't thinking in terms of those things. I don't know why Dr. Oziel asked me the things he asked me and didn't ask me the things he didn't ask me. You can ask Dr. Oziel. I mean, I don't know why. He did a lot of things that I didn't understand. I don't know why he asked me what he wanted to ask me. Mr. Khan says, so it appeared to you that Dr. Oziel was not curious as to why you went into that room. Is that correct? I think it was clear that Dr. Oziel was more curious about the details of the shooting, the gruesome part of it, and what the police knew and why I wasn't arrested. That was clear. He was curious about where you bought your shotguns. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative, and calls for speculation. Rephrase the question. Did it appear to you that Dr. Oziel was curious about where you bought the shot? Wait, what? Oh, sorry. I just totally skipped a line. My brain is shutting down from all the reading. Did it appear to you that Dr. Oziel was curious about where you bought the shotguns? Mr. Levin says objection, vague with respect to curious. Overruled, says the court. The witness says I know what he asked me, and he asked me that. He asked me where Lyle. Mr. Khan says I would object, non-responsive, motion to strike. The court says sustained. The answer is stricken. Mr. Khan says the question, Mr. Menendez, is did it appear to you that Dr. Oziel was curious about where you purchased the shotgun? Objection, no foundation. This witness knows what he. There's no foundation that this witness knows what he, Dr. Oziel, is expressing curiosity about. Court says he can give an answer. Seriously, everything gets overruled with this judge. Almost everything. He's given the defense a few things, but not a whole lot in this trial, if you've read along with me. The witness says Dr. Oziel asked me where Lyle and I got a hold of two guns, and I answered his question. I answered all of the questions as best that I could. Did it appear to you that he was curious as to where you purchased the shotgun? I guess yes. Did it appear to you that he was curious as to what became of the shotguns? No, I don't think he seriously or specifically asked me that. I think that's just one of the things that I told him when I was rambling on. Did it appear to you he was curious about how the shooting actually took place? Yeah, he did ask questions about that. And by that, you're saying talking about the physical movements? He was curious about the movements of you and your brother at the time. Wait, what? That's another question. I don't know. They skipped an answer here or another question. Yeah, so he was curious about the movements of you and your brother at that time. He was curious as to how my parents actually were shot and what happened inside the room. Did it appear to you that he was not interested in why you shot them to begin with? I'm just telling you what he asked me and the answers that I gave him, why and what Dr. Oziel did. I don't know why. Mr. Menendez, you gave Dr. Oziel reasons for shooting your parents, didn't you? We discussed it after Lyle was called, and I couldn't give him a good reason. I said that, there were conversations that week. I said, I don't know why. I don't. And he said, well, we're going to have to do hypnosis. It's understandable why you don't know why. It was a very complicated relationship. He had opinions that he was floating by me to see if I agreed or not in terms of what he knew about my parents. Hmm, interesting. He would float opinions in front of him to see what Erik thought about his parents. Like Oziel was reading the room to see what Eric's own opinions were about his parents. Mr. Menendez, the reasons that you gave to Dr. Oziel for shooting your parents appear in the December 11th tape. Isn't that true? I think that my words express it most clearly. And what reasons did you give Dr. Oziel for shooting your parents? I told him that I had no choice and that had I had any other choice, that I would have taken it, and how I regretted it and wished I hadn't done it, and that I wish I could go back, and that I just did not have a choice at the time. I am not asking you whether you told Dr. Oziel whether or not you had a choice. I am asking you what reasons did you give Dr. Oziel for shooting your parents? Objection, Your Honor. It's asked and answered, says Mr. Levin. The witness says, those are my words. Court says, overruled. The witness says, those are my words on tape. This is what I said. Mr. Khan says, I am asking you, what was your reason? Objection, Your Honor. He stated his reason, says Mr. Levin. The witness says, he didn't ask me. The court says, 1 second, your lawyer is objecting. The witness says, oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Court says, what was the objection? Asked and answered, he stated the reason. The court says, he can pursue further inquiry. Overruled. The witness says, when I told Dr. Oziel I had no choice, he never asked me what I meant by that. Dr. Oziel didn't give a F about these two. All he saw was money signs. He saw money when he saw these people. And that's what he had so many like side businesses and things. I'm trying to remember all of the details about him. He was so corrupt and unethical. And he had clients doing like home repairs on his house for exchange for services and things like that, like for therapy services. Like he was having an affair with Judalon Smith, who was one of his clients. He was just a very, very, very unethical man, I believe. Was. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not. But no, I think he's still alive and just not practicing. I did a where is everybody after the first trial. And I think he's still alive, but he's not practicing as a therapist anymore. Um, I think he lost his license. So because of everything that came out, I think in this trial. And other reasons. Like he had other complaints even before this trial began. So he had his own issues. So it's interesting that when he's talking to or through this exchange, we're getting questions like from the prosecutor, like, well, why didn't the therapist ask you these questions? Well, I don't know. Put Oziel on the stand and ask him why he didn't ask me these questions. Because they failed to put Oziel on the stand this time because Oziel is such a problematic witness for them. And because of the whole Judalon Smith having the affair, and then she came in the first trial and testified for the defense. His mistress testified for the defense, if you forgot or need a refresher. And she's actually the one that turned the Menendez brothers in because he was using the whole Menendez brothers against Judel and Smith, saying that they were going to come after her and hurt her if he said anything. So it was like all really weird. He's a psycho, and I think he needs therapy. But anyway, so all these questions are being asked by the prosecutor. Well, why didn't he ask you that? He didn't want to know this? Well, it says something to Oziel's state of mind that he didn't want to know the whys and the hows and how it happened and everything. He's more concerned about like the gory details he wants over anything else. So it's clear that he's not really in it for the right reasons. And in the December 11th tape, most of it is Dr. Oziel saying, well, you did it because of this, or your parents were like this. It's mostly Oziel doing the talking, saying, this is how your parents were, or this is how you felt, or this is how your parents felt. And basically, like, narrating the story of what happened and putting in his own perspective, his own 2 cents, which is oftentimes wrong, which both Lyle and Erik testified later. Whatever, those conversations were with Oziel were while they were happening, it was mostly Oziel doing the talking, and they were off to the side, kind of just agreeing, going along to go along to, for conversation's sake. So a lot of that is from Oziel making some things up. He's not a nice guy. And it irks me that they didn't call him. The state is asking all these questions on behalf of Oziel. Like, why didn't Oziel ask you this? But you should be calling Oziel and asking Oziel why, but you don't want to because he's a horrible witness for you. All right. So Mr. Khan says, so you're telling us that at no time on October 31st, on November the 2nd, and on December 11th, did you ever give Dr. Oziel a reason for shooting your parents? No, it was agreed to before that tape was made that the reasons we would discuss it on the tape and the reasons we would discuss on the tape, and I was willing to. And what I was willing, not so much what I was willing to say, but what we were going to say. And that pretty much evolved around the fact that my mother didn't want to live anymore, and that's why we killed her. That was Oziel's comment that Mary didn't want to live anymore. Kitty didn't want to live anymore. And that was what was discussed before, and that's what it had been whittled down to. And that's what I was willing to say on the tape. Other things were said that hurt me, and to the point where I broke down and started telling him things that I shouldn't have been telling him. At what point did you agree to giving reasons to Dr. Oziel for killing your parents? I spoke with him for over 2 hours on November 2nd about a lot of things, just not just reasons, but I spoke with him for 2 hours on the 2nd, and he believed from talking to me and from knowing my parents that my mother was killed because she didn't want to live anymore and she wanted to take herself out, and that my dad, go ahead. My question to you is, are you telling us that you reached an agreement with your brother concerning reasons that you were going to give Dr. Oziel for why your parents were killed? No. After the 31st, after Lyle had come to the session, I then went back to the house with Lyle, and he asked me what I told Dr. Oziel, and I told him what I had told him. He asked me if I told him more specifically about the molestation, the sex with dad, and I said no. He was adamant that he did not want that to be discussed. He did not want to get into that area. He did not want to talk about the sex between him and dad. He did not want to talk about that. He said, if you're having difficulty living, I understand. We can talk about it, our relationship with mom and dad, and what we knew about mom and dad, and so on. But he did not want to get into that, and I agreed. And we went back to meet with Dr. Oziel at that point because it was for several different reasons. Mr. Menendez, my question to you is, did you and your brother reach an agreement concerning reasons that you were going to give Dr. Oziel for why you killed your parents? Yes or no? No. He specifically said that he did not want to talk about those reasons. Now, you agreed on October 31st with your brother that you were going to go back on November the 2nd? Yes. What was your reason for going back to speak to Dr. Oziel on November the 2nd? Just that we didn't want to leave it the way that it had ended on the first. Dr. Oziel said that he had that information, he could go to the police. We weren't sure what he was going to do. We weren't sure what Dr. Oziel was going to do, but I definitely felt that we needed to go back and see him and talk to him and find out what was going on. So you were afraid that Dr. Oziel was going to go to the police, is that correct? Yes. And is that because of something that Dr. Oziel said on October 31st before you and your brother left his office? I believe so. And what was it that Dr. Oziel told you on October the 31st before you left his office that gave you concern that Dr. Oziel might go to the police? He said that because Lyle didn't want to talk about the killing of my parents, Lyle didn't even acknowledge to Dr. Oziel on the 31st that he was responsible. He did not want to discuss it with Dr. Oziel. He didn't trust Dr. Oziel, and he was right not to. And Dr. Oziel was saying, I am feeling because I have this information and you don't want to talk to me, I am feeling threatened. I am feeling like maybe I am in some type of danger because I am the only one that has this information. And he said that he would go to the police with the information. And Lyle was saying, I want to find out what Erik told you before I discuss anything with you. I want to know what Erik has told you. And that's because he didn't want to discuss what was going on with Dad. Dr. Oziel expressed on October 31st that he was frightened of you and your brother. Is that correct? Right. He was saying that, and that's what I was finding hard to believe. And Dr. Oziel, who knew you, expressed on October 31st that he was concerned that you and your brother might harm him. Is that correct? No. Objection, argumentative. Overruled. The answer will stand. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I would like to approach. Court says, there is no reason to approach. That's his opinion, but that's not necessarily Ms. Abramson's opinion. But okay. The witness says, he was saying that he was feeling threatened. He didn't say that Lyle and I would hurt him. He knew Lyle and I, and obviously I was going to harm and obviously I was not going to harm him. I was not the one who went to him in the first place and told him these things. He knew that very well, and that's why I was surprised he was saying it because he did know me, and he also knew that I am the one that went to him voluntarily and told him these facts. Obviously, I wasn't going to harm him. He just felt threatened. He was saying because he knew he was the only person in the world that knew this, and he wanted to get more information. He wanted us to open up. Dr. Oziel expressed fear of both you and your brother on both October the 31st and November the 2nd. Is that correct? On November the 2nd, it was a little bit different. Did he express fear of both of you and your brother on those dates? No. I'm sorry? No. And directing counsel's attention to volume 101. What page, says Ms. Abramson? 16969. Line? Line counsel? 6 through 18, says Mr. Khan. Levin says, no objection. Mr. Khan says, do you remember being asked the following questions and giving the following answers in the first trial? What line? I'm sorry, counsel. Mr. Levin says, 18. Ms. Abramson says, fine, I'm sorry. Mr. Khan says, question. On November the 2nd of 1989, is that session that you had with your brother and Dr. Oziel? Dr. Oziel, I think, let me rephrase that. Ms. Abramson says, just start at 14 counsel. I might make that might make more sense. Mr. Khan says, no, I propose to read from the following page, 16968, starting with line 26 through line 18 on the next page. Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, I would object to the additional. Mr. Getzler says, I also object, Your Honor. The court says, okay, well, let me see it then. Mr. Levin says line 26 to 18 on the next page. Court says, right. The only part I see that would be inconsistent or for purposes of impeachment is on the second page, line 14 through 18. Mr. Khan says, all right. Ms. Abramson says, that's what I suggested. Mr. Levin says, that's what we didn't object to. Mr. Khan says, all right, if that's unclear, I may need a follow-up question to that. Do you remember being asked the following question? Question, Dr. Oziel had expressed that he was afraid, correct? Answer, I guess he said he was afraid on the Mr. Levin says, wait. Ms. Abramson says, you skipped to 17, counsel. Go back to 16. Question. Dr. Oziel had expressed he was afraid, correct? Answer. He said that he was afraid on the 31st. I guess he still said that he was afraid. Yeah. Do you remember giving that answer? No, not particularly, but that's what I said. Well, let me show it to you. Okay. Is that the answer that you gave? Yes, sir. And when you said, I guess he still said that he was afraid, you were referring to November the 2nd. Is that correct? I was. All right, so you testified previously that Dr. Oziel expressed fear of you and your brother on both October 31st and November 2nd. Is that correct? No. Objection misstates the testimony as just read to the jury. The court says, sustained, rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says, Dr. Oziel expressed that he was afraid of both October the 31st. He was afraid on both October the 31st and November the 2nd. Is that correct? On November the 2nd, it was a much different expression. Yes. Guess what? Did he convey that? Or he did convey that. That being what? The witness says that he was afraid, that he had this knowledge. He never said, I am afraid of you, you're going to harm me. I just found it inconceivable to believe that Dr. Oziel was afraid of me, and it became apparent in that session that I didn't believe that he was, and that I thought he was saying that for different reasons, than simply the merit of a statement. Hmm. Mr. Khan says, Mr. Menendez, are you saying that you were of the impression that Dr. Oziel was fearful of information? No, he was saying that he was afraid that he had this knowledge, or that he felt very uncomfortable that he had this knowledge that no one else knew. It was obvious what he was saying. On November 2nd, it was all the more obvious by the end of the session. Mr. Menendez, didn't Dr. Oziel say that he was uncomfortable with the information? Dr. Oziel said that he was afraid. Is that correct? He said all that. And he was afraid of you and your brother. Isn't that correct? He would never have said that to me because I cannot imagine him saying that to me with a straight face. Well, whether you can imagine it or not, he was expressing not discomfort, he was expressing fear. Is that correct? Right. He was expressing fear, and it was very difficult for me to believe that what he was saying was actually what he was feeling, and it became clear that it wasn't. And so you felt he was expressing fear of what, Mr. Menendez? Fear that he had this information and that he was the only one that had this information. Why is information something to cause fear in your mind, Mr. Menendez? Because my brother and I were the only ones beside him that because Lyle and I had done this, and he is the only one that knew, and he expressed fear for that reason. And you were concerned? Apparently, that's what he said on the 31st, and that's part of the reason we went back on the 2nd. So you were concerned that he might go to the police, is that correct? When? After the meeting on the 31st? After the meeting on the 31st, when I was talking to Lyle, it was a concern that he might go to the police, and that's why I suggested to Lyle that maybe we should tell him more. He still felt that in the end we should not. So you felt that you should tell him more. I, what do you mean by that? I just thought it was that the situation had really gotten out of hand and that I just went in there because I couldn't live with myself. That's the reason I wanted to be there to talk about that. I didn't want to talk about all these other reasons. But the way to calm down Dr. Oziel, I told Lyle, was to have him think that I wasn't a bad person, which is what I wanted him to tell me, that I wasn't a bad person, was to tell him what happened. I didn't have any desire to do it, and I didn't really want to do it, but I brought that up to Lyle, and Lyle said, no, we'll calm him down and he won't go to the police and we will give him what he wants and satisfy him. But he did not want to get into those issues and he was adamant about it. And I agreed. I didn't want to get into them either. So, what did you decide to do to calm down Dr. Oziel so he wouldn't go to the police? Eventually, we decided to give him this tape and to go to the business with him when he inherited from our estate. To go into business with him once they got their inheritance. Because Dr. Oziel was always trying to go into business with the brothers after he found out that parents were dead. That was another angle of Dr. Oziel's sliminess, was that once parents were dead, he was trying to get the money in some ways or another. He was attending the funeral and going to the hotel for days, like a 3 or 4 day session. Like, what is that? And then he's doing this. It's weird. It's just weird. All right. Anyways, so what did you decide to do to calm down Dr. Oziel so he wouldn't go to the police? Eventually, we decided to give him this tape and go into business with him when we inherited from our from our estate. So business with Dr. Oziel. I would never go into business with Dr. Oziel. Mr. Menendez, I am talking about on October the 31st, what was about 6 weeks before the December 11th tape. Is that correct? Yes. There was a session on November the 2nd in between those two occasions. Is that correct? There was. Okay, now when did you decide that you were going to have a session with Dr. Oziel on November the 2nd? At my Jeep. Dr. Oziel, that is on the 31st? Yes. So you made the arrangement with him then, right then and there, or we will see you on the 2nd? Yes. And he said this already. He's already testified to this. He's already made this clear. Yet here we are an hour later still talking about it. It's so infuriating, the line of questioning. It's like every little thing that Erik says, it's almost like you're insinuating he's lying about something or you just don't trust him. And then you ask all the questions over and over again in multiple ways to try to trip him up. It's really frustrating. It would be frustrating for anyone to sit there on the stand like that. So you made this agreement to go see you on the 2nd. Yes. And then you went home with Lyle and you discussed whether or not you should meet with Dr. Oziel. Is that correct? No, I don't really believe that was that what we discussed. We discussed what we should do in terms of meeting with Oziel. What should we tell him when we should go back on the 2nd? When we go back on the 2nd, sorry. We knew he was going to be asking more about why and more questions surrounding it, and we decided to go back and see what he wanted and how he felt and feel about the situation. Well, did you devise a plan as to how you were going to calm this man down? I'm referring to the October the 31st. What was your plan on October 31st as to how you were going to calm this man down so he wouldn't go to the police? to do what he wanted, and in whatever way he felt he would be calmed down and it would satisfy him was what we were going to do. Didn't you realize you were going to have to tell him something to calm him down a little bit? I had brought up to Lyle that we should tell him, and that in itself would calm him down. The information about what really happened. Lyle just, he didn't want to do it. I wasn't pushing for it. I didn't want to do it. And so obviously something was going to calm Dr. Oziel down in whatever it was going to do, and whatever it was I was going to do. Weird way of saying that. Okay. Whatever he wanted, whatever he needed, whatever satisfied him, we were going to do it. I felt trapped. So he felt coerced by Oziel's threats. Well, I feel threatened and you wouldn't want to make me feel uncomfortable now, would you? So you better come see me. So are you saying that on October the 31st, you decided when you went back on November the 2nd, you were just going to play it by ear, see what he wanted to hear, and tell him anything he wanted to hear? No. We did talk about, since we weren't going to tell him what happened, what were the parameters of things we could tell him. And Lyle said, talk about your relationship with mom and even your relationship with dad, if that makes you feel better. And he didn't really trust Oziel, but if it made me feel better, that's what we would talk about. And he just did not he just wanted to avoid getting into the sex and his molestation in particular at all costs. He did not want to discuss it. So that's the only thing that was off bounds. Now, did you and your brother have a conversation on October the 31st where you said to each other, look, based upon what Oziel knows and doesn't know at this point, we might look like cold blooded murderers who stormed into that room without reason? Essentially, that's what I was saying. If we told him what had happened, he wouldn't think we were bad persons and he would all understand and he would be calmed down. But really, it's not something that I wanted to do, and it's something Lyle was adamant about, and we just decided to give him whatever he wanted instead. You didn't want to do that because you didn't want to talk about the molestation. Is that what you're saying? I did not want to discuss it with anybody. I didn't want to tell anybody. All it would do is make me suffer more, re victimizing the victim, right? Which is all of this days and days on end of testimony is doing too, is re victimizing the victim. But Mr. Menendez, what you could have done when you went back on November the 2nd was to tell Dr. Oziel that you killed your parents because you believed they were going to kill you and just not tell him about the molestation. Is that correct? Objection, argumentative, overruled. To tell him that we killed our parents because they were going to kill us, but not tell him why they were going to kill us? Precisely. Well, if I wasn't going to tell him why they were going to kill us, then I might as well not even tell him why it happened. So you would rather allow Dr. Oziel to believe that you were cold-blooded murderers who went into that room and killed your parents without any good reason than to let him know that you did this in self-defense? Objection, argumentative, sustained. Rephrase the question. Were you concerned, or did you feel that it might be better for you to give Dr. Oziel the impression that you had killed in self defense, even if you don't give him the reason as to why you killed in self defense, rather than leaving him with the impression that you had stormed into the room and killed for no good reason? I don't believe Dr. Oziel felt that I was a cold blooded person, but I believe that obviously he knew we had done this. He didn't have a good reason as to why, and so clearly was uncomfortable and didn't understand. He believed his own reasons why, but I didn't see a difference between we killed because they were going to kill us and the molestation. How, how were they not one and the same? So he didn't want to give that away without giving away the other part. How is not the shooting and how the shooting came about not one and the same? Why you went into the room and did the shooting in the first place? Objection, argumentative, it's vague. The court says, well, it's vague as to the question. Rephrase it, please. Mr. Menendez, why is not the reason for the shooting as intertwined with the shooting itself as the fear is intertwined with the molestation? Objection, it's vague and it's compound and it's argumentative. Do you understand the question? I'm not certain. Re ask the question. Mr. Khan says, Mr. Menendez, you felt that you could just tell him about the circumstances of the shooting without telling him the reason for the shooting. Is that correct? I didn't think about it beforehand. I didn't want to go in there to tell him about the circumstances of the shooting. I was guilt ridden and I needed to get it off my chest that I had done it. And so the specifics about what I had done and what I told the police, I just told him. But that wasn't connected to why this all happened. That's a different issue. All right, then let's talk about after you came out of the session on October 31st and you met with your brother and you were discussing it with your brother. You realized at that point in time that you had told Dr. Oziel about the circumstances surrounding the shooting, including the purchase of the guns and so forth and so on. And you were able to separate from that the reason for the killings. Is that correct? Well, I mean, I didn't tell him all the circumstances around the killing. I did tell him that I went to four different gun stores. I told him that we went to one, and I didn't tell him any of the details that happened that weekend other than the shootings. And I just did not see them as I wasn't there to talk about the reason and to talk about the what's and the what's and the whys is different. I never understood how you could talk about the fact my parents were going to kill me and not talk about why at the same time. Mr. Menendez, why were you able to understand how you could talk about the how of the shooting without also telling them why? This is ridiculous line of questioning. Who gives a crap? He could. This is such a waste of time. Why are we beating around the like just beating a dead horse with this? It is ridiculous. He's already answered the question. So fucking frustrating. Sorry for my language. Um, hmm. Why were you able to understand how you could talk about the how of the shooting without also telling him why you went into the room in the first place? Because I was doing it. I needed to tell him what happened. I needed to tell him that I had done it and when I told him that I had done it, he said, "What did you do?" And I told him what I did. And I needed to get that off my chest. I had no need whatsoever to get off my chest the fact that my dad had been having sex with me and that I had been with him for 12 years doing that. I just didn't need to do that. I wanted to do just the opposite. I wanted to bury it forever. Their whole defense and everything that they did comes back to they didn't want to get they didn't want to tell the family secret. They were trying to protect Jose. Everything in the case, everything that they did, all the little mistakes that they made along the way, because it was obviously not premeditated because of the mistakes that they made, but the things that they did, you can tell. It's from that fear of it coming out, the fear of not wanting the world to know that their father was doing these things to them. So that's kind of sad. I mean, this whole case is horrific. But it is sad thinking that basically everything they did was just to protect their father in the end. And you could have buried it and simply told Dr. Oziel, Doctor, we killed our parents for reasons of fear, and I really don't want to tell you for my own personal reasons what led up to that fear. I suppose it's conceivable that I could have said that to him. And did you just Objection. He hasn't finished his answer, Your Honor. The court says, had you finished your answer? No. I didn't see it that way. I still don't. And I don't see how I could have done that. Mr. Khan says, did you discuss that possibility with your brother, Lyle Menendez? No. It never came up on October the 31st at all. It came up telling why this happened, and we just did not separate. If we told him that we were in fear, he's naturally going to ask why a zillion times, why we would be afraid. What would make us afraid? Why would we be afraid they were going to kill us? What would that be? And obviously, we were going to have to get into it then, and we just did not want to do that. Did you tell him Dr. Oziel might go to the police? We have to let him know that we didn't do this in a cold-blooded way. We did this for the reason of fear. Did you ever tell that to your brother? Right. I said maybe we should do that, but I wasn't strong-willed about it. I didn't want to get into it. The only reason I suggested it was to simply calm Oziel down and not make him think I was a bad person, because obviously a bad person does this without reasons behind it. And that's the only reason that I brought it up to Lyle. But I didn't. We just decided to satisfy Oziel through other means, through other ways. Whatever he wanted, we did that. So you went to the session on November the 2nd. What happened? He told us that he now had his notes, our tapes or tapes. He may have tape recorded his notes. He did tape record his notes in safety deposit boxes, and that if anything happened to him, that those would be revealed. He told us that he had felt uncomfortable after the 31st. He told us that he was legally able to go to the police and reveal everything that we had told him, and that he would not do that if he told us that if we came to an agreement of a sort. He told me that he had filed for disability because of the stress he felt that he was under, and that he also told me that disability was only getting so much. It turns out it was like 8,000 a month. What? And that he wanted us to compensate him for his stress that he was under. Mother effer is like, I won't turn you guys in if you give me a salary. Hire me. Why would I want to hire you? You're extorting me. But, anyways, now, when he told you that he had memorialized his notes in some fashion and that if anything happened to him, the notes would be revealed, did it occur to you that he was saying to you that you better not hurt him because the notes are going to come out? Right. That's precisely what I gathered from that. Isn't it true, Mr. Menendez? It was at that point in time that you realized in no uncertain terms that Dr. Oziel was afraid of you and your brother? It's actually at that point, that's not all he said. The session went on to now talk about how we could financially help him and how we could mutually benefit from going into business. That's not my question. And so I'm saying is, Mr. Khan says, I would make a motion to strike. The witness keeps going, and that made me realize that he wasn't really afraid. Overruled, the answer will stand. Mr. Khan says, so you're saying that because he was talking to you about financial matters, that he was not truly afraid of you? Is that correct? Before he even mentioned financial matters, I found it just impossible to believe that he was afraid of me. I just didn't really believe it. Maybe he felt a little threatened, but to believe that I could kill him, it's not possible. Well, weren't you trying to reassure him that there was no reason to feel threatened? Yes, by any means possible. And that is because you were concerned that he did, in fact, feel threatened. Isn't that correct? Because I was concerned that he would go to the police with the information. What was accomplished in that session on November the 2nd? Objection with respect to the word accomplished. The court says it's vague. Rephrase the question. Mr. Khan says yes. What was done on that occasion, November the 2nd? We talked about my parents. We talked about what a shambles the family was. when outside it seemed so perfect and how no one understood what was actually occurring inside the family. We talked about my mom, the depression that she had after moving to California and finding out about the affairs and the drinking. We talked about Dr. Oziel's companies that he was beginning. He showed us his cards and that he wanted us to invest with him once the inheritance came through and that we could all benefit from this and that everyone could be satisfied. But I pretty much wanted to talk about still and still had a need, even after the session, to talk about my feelings about this, about the pain that I was in. Well, during that session, what did you and your brother say about why you killed your parents? I remember Lyle saying, I don't want to discuss why. I don't know why. I am here to talk about, I am not here to talk about why. We could talk about feelings we had about our parents and to help me deal with why I no longer wanted to live. And Dr. Oziel said, we'll get to that issue later. And he wanted to talk about the overall relationships that were in the family. He kept wanting to talk about the relationships. It was a big thing for him. Are you saying that at no time did your brother Lyle Menendez ever give Dr. Oziel a reason why you killed your parents? No. What I'm saying is that it was I guess the answer is yes. But we didn't disagree with him. He felt that after hearing it all and knowing what he knew about my father, that my mother had been killed out of mercy. And to be honest, I really kind of liked hearing that. The idea that my mother didn't want to live with a comforting feeling was a comforting feeling that maybe she didn't want to live anyway. And so I said, maybe that's true. And he was trying to get to the bottom of it. Well, did anyone express why it was that your father was killed? There were different reasons floated. One, that he was killed because he couldn't live with the fact that my mother was killed, so he had to be killed too. That was said. And Dr. Oziel pretty much felt that my dad was killed because of the extreme control he had over Lyle. And wasn't it true, Mr. Menendez, that Dr. Oziel felt that way because that's precisely what you told him? I never told him that. I didn't tell him otherwise, but I never. Isn't it true? Objection, says Mr. Levin. But I never volunteered to and said that to him. Mr. Khan says, isn't it true, Mr. Menendez, that you gave Dr. Oziel reasons and Dr. Oziel did not give you reasons? That's not at all what happened. So you're telling us that you sat there and Dr. Oziel said that it was a mercy killing, and you said, sure, that's right, it was a mercy killing. You're simplifying it to a degree that is just not the case. We talked about my mother and her depression and what he knew about my mother, about our relationship and our love for her and her torment, and the fact that she was badly battered by our father. And he would say, do you think it was a mercy killing? And we would talk about that. And eventually, that's what it boiled down to, and that's what happened. It wasn't simply him saying, this is a mercy killing, and my saying, yes, that's not at all what happened. You met with him again on December 11th, is that correct? Yes, I did. And at that time, the conversation was recorded, is that correct? Yes. And at that time, the reason that was expressed for the killing of your parents was that your father was a controlling and dominating man and that you and your brother could no longer take it any longer. Isn't that true? Are you reading this tape? I'm asking you a question about what was expressed on December the 11th. It was just the opposite. Your Honor, I would object as compound and vague. The court says overruled, the answer will stand. The witness says, no, that's not at all what it says. Mr. Khan says, what was the reason that was expressed on the December 11th session as to why your father was killed? Objection, it's vague as to who expressed it. Overruled. The witness says, as to why Dad was killed, Lyle gave two different reasons. If I remember correctly, one, he said that Dad was killed because of the fact that he couldn't live with the fact that he had basically killed his wife, and so he couldn't live with that guilt, and so he had been killed for that reason. And Dr. Oziel asked if it had to do with control, and Lyle said that it had nothing to do with him. And I am not sure if Lyle gave any other specific reasons for why my dad was killed. Did you give reason for why your father was killed? Yes, what I told you. What reason did you give on December 11th for why your father was killed? That I had no other choice, and that I had any that if I had had any other choice, I would have taken the other choice. What were you talking about was uh what you were talking about was a situation of domination and control that you did not want to tolerate anymore. Isn't that the truth? Erik says, what happened on the tape was Dr. Oziel saying, your father is a ruthless man. He is like a machine. And I did not want to hear these negative things about my father. It was not part of the agreement. That's not what I wanted to hear. That made me just feel worse as a person. And that's when I broke down and said, you don't understand. I had no choice but to do this. This is not for these reasons. You said you had almost no choice. Isn't that what you said? If you want me to read it, I'll read exactly what I said. The court says, all right, well, let's take our break. It's a little after 3 o'clock and we'll resume in 20 minutes after the hour. Don't talk about the matter with or form any final opinions about it. We will resume after 20 minutes. The court says, okay, the jury is in the jury box. You may proceed. Mr. Khan says, thank you. Mr. Menendez, when you went to this session on December 12th or 11th, did you go alone? No, my brother was there as well. Were any other persons present? Before the session started, Jerry Chaliff was present. Jerry Chaliff was the family lawyer at the time? Right. Do you know what Jerry Chaliff was doing there? Your Honor, objection. We asked to approach. The court says, okay, let's do it. And then the following proceedings were held outside the presence of the jury. The court says, okay. Mr. Levin says, yes, Your Honor, we would like an offer of proof with respect to anything dealing with any testimony of this witness concerning Mr. Chaliff. The court says, what do you mean by an offer of proof? Mr. Levin says, well, we don't feel that anything that Mr. Khan would inquire of concerning Mr. Chaliff is relevant. Mr. Chaliff was not there during the 12-11 session. Ms. Abramson says it's also privileged. The court says, well, he was present for the session. Ms. Abramson says, no, not during the taping, he wasn't. The court says he was present beforehand, and we've had testimony of the defendant as to the purpose of the tape, what arrangements were made, and things of that nature. Ms. Abramson says, yeah, but you've already ruled that had nothing to do with Mr. Chaliff. The court says it doesn't matter. The witness is on the witness stand and he's giving answers. He can be cross-examined on what he says. Ms. Abramson says, for him to say what the purpose that Mr. Chaliff is there may have to do with a privileged conversation between him and Mr. Chaliff that the people have no right to get into. He didn't say Mr. Chaliff was there. Mr. Khan just asked. He didn't volunteer that Chaliff was there or why Chaliff was there, and it may be privileged. We're saying it is. The court says the whole thing arose when, on direct examination, the session was brought up by Mr. Levin as to how it was set up. Then, during cross-examination, the defendant has said several times that there were arrangements made and things of this nature as to why and what was to be covered during the session and what the purpose of the session was. Ms. Abramson said, nevertheless, he didn't indicate that Mr. Chaliff had anything to do with that, nor did he indicate that Mr. Chaliff was part of the specific things he said, that there was an hour discussion. The court says he is going to say that Chaliff did not have any involvement in setting it up or arranging for it. Or Ms. Abramson says, I think we would object to those questions being asked. Those are privileged. The court says they're not privileged at this point because he answered questions about why he was there and the purpose of the meeting. Ms. Abramson says, but that doesn't have anything to do with why Mr. Chaliff was there. He didn't say that Mr. Chaliff had anything to do with it. He didn't bring it to Mr. Chaliff, nor did he say that Mr. Chaliff made the arrangements. So to ask questions about why Mr. Chaliff, the court says you're speaking loud enough probably for people in the courtroom to hear. Ms. Abramson says, I don't mean to be loud, only to be clear. He's only talking about why he was there with Oziel and what was going on between him and his brother and Oziel. My understanding is the Chaliff meeting was before any of this. Mr. Gessler says, we join in that, Your Honor. I believe Gerald Chaliff was representing both brothers at that particular time, and I assert his attorney-client privilege with Gerald Chaliff as to the discussion that preceded that taping. The court says, are you going into the content? No, says Mr. Khan. I'm not getting into the content. Just what was the purpose, the exact purpose of this meeting, something for which he already testified. And I think that I can question him regarding that without asking him specific questions concerning specific conversations with Mr. Chaliff. Ms. Abramson says there's two different meetings we're talking about. One is a meeting with Dr. Oziel and Jerry Chaliff, and the second is the meeting with just Dr. Oziel, and he is not made reference to the first meeting, which is when Mr. Chaliff was there. So to ask what's the purpose of this meeting has nothing to do with Mr. Chaliff. And the defendant hasn't indicated that Mr. Chaliff had anything to do with setting this up, or this meeting up, or the taping with Dr. Oziel, or the discussions that produced the taping with Dr. Oziel. I believe Mr. Chaliff was the lawyer for the will. He was the one that was preparing the will. So to say that you want to ask about the purpose by definition means revealing discussions he had with his lawyer. That is an absolute privilege and it has not been waived, and he has no right to ask about the purpose of Mr. Chaliff being there because that leads to discussions between him and his lawyer. Court says, okay. By the defendant testifying about the purpose of the meeting, the prosecution, Ms. Amerson says, with Oziel. Court says, wait. The prosecution clearly can inquire as to the totality of the purpose for the meeting, and if it happens to involve Chaliff, so be it. Ms. Amerson says he hasn't said any of it involves. The court says if he's going to deny that Chaliff was involved in establishing the purpose for the meeting and what was to occur during the meeting, then that's what he could say. But Ms. Abramson says that's not what he asked him. He asked him what was the purpose of Mr. Chaliff being there. The court says same thing. No, it isn't the same thing, says Ms. Abramson. The purpose of Mr. Chaliff being there, I will be happy to discuss with the court in camera, not on the record. Court says, well, I've heard Mr. Chaliff's testimony. I am aware of what Mr. Chaliff testified to, and you can't amplify his purpose for being there. I know it from his testimony as to what the purpose was. Mr. Gessler says, the problem is, Your Honor, in asking. Ms. Abramson says, I can't even argue that in front of Mr. Khan because he wasn't privy to that. Mr. Gessler says, in asking Erik Menendez anything about that, it evades that particular privilege between him and Gerald Chaliff and my client, Lyle Menendez, and Gerald Chaliff. That has not been brought up by the defense, and to get into this, it is no different than asking about advice of counsel on any other subject which would be also privileged. The privilege has not been waived by this client talking about his own reasons for talking to Dr. Oziel. That has not been waived. That is not waived as a client attorney privilege, nor my client's attorney-client privilege with Gerald Chafe. The court says, okay. Well, I would have to hear the balance of the defendant's testimony, but as I said, he has already testified as to reasons for the meeting and how it was set up. I'll sustain the objection as to this particular question, but I'm not ruling that the theory is subject to further inquiry. But it would have to be addressed in some other way. Ms. Abramson says, okay, I understand that. The court says, but let me hear what it is that the defendant is going to say in that regard first. Ms. Abramson says, in what regard, Your Honor? I'm not clear. The court says, in regard to the totality of the reasons why this meeting was set up, the purpose for it, and things of that nature. The meeting with Oziel? Says Ms. Abramson. The court says, yes. Ms. Abramson says his reasons for the meeting with Oziel. The court says no, the reasons for them, the reasons. Ms. Abramson says, well, his brother might have other reasons. The court says, well, he might be aware of those reasons and the purpose of the meeting, what the use of the tape was to be, things of those nature, they're germane. Ms. Abramson says, I want to make one thing clear. When the court indicates that the defense started this by talking about the purpose, we didn't start this. We objected to the introduction of this tape. The fact that the people were allowed to put on this tape without Oziel, the court says the tape is right. Ms. Abramson continues, without Oziel, if I could finish briefly, Your Honor, for the record, the court says, sure, required our client to explain how this tape was made and why this tape was made. So it's not that this is not something we would have liked to avoid altogether, as I'm sure the court can understand. So I want that to be clear. I mean, since the people were allowed to play the tape with no foundation whatsoever for it, except the identification of voices on it. The court says, I'm satisfied there was a foundation sufficient for it to be played. So that's water under the bridge, over the dam, and past history. Now, we're talking about this event and this testimony at this time, and I think the people have a right to explore it in detail. Ms. Abramson says, I think they have no right to inject Mr. Chaliff into it at all at this point, since the defense has not. The court says it's not whether the defense has or not, it's whether the facts have injected Mr. Chaliff, depending on how the defendant testifies. Ms. Abramson says he's also not in a position to prove anything about this. They don't have Mr. Chaliff under subpoena. They don't have Dr. Oziel under subpoena. The court says you have your witness. He's on this witness stand. He's under oath. We'll hear what he has to say. Mr. Gessler says, can I ask on what offer of proof the district attorney is making that the attorney-client privilege concerning Mr. Chaliff and his advice to either of their clients, his client Lyle or his client Erik, has been breached or waived in this proceeding so far? The court says, well, I don't need an offer of proof. Okay. We have the testimony of the defendant on the witness stand as to his state of mind, as to why the tape was being made, the purpose of it, what it was going to be used for, why he said things on the tape. You have all of those things in the record and before the jury, and the prosecution certainly has a right to explore that. It's a question of getting half truths, partial truths, or whole truths. Mr. Gessler says, it may be, Your Honor, but privilege always protects half the truth, I suppose. But yet the privilege overcomes the findings of the whole truth sometimes. The attorney-client privilege is one of the most inviolate, next to the clergy penitent, more inviolate, I don't know if you say that, inviolate, in whatever that means. Well, I'm sure it means like the most sacred, like don't violate it. Really, than more than a clergy or a psychotherapist, he says, or akin to, similar to. The court says, we're talking about now the Oziel taped conversation and the purpose for it, and the defendant has testified about the purpose for it. The people have a right to explore it fully. And if the defendant hasn't given a complete answer as to the purpose for it, then the people have a right to get the full answer. Ms. Abramson says, let's say the purpose is that his lawyer said to him, do this because I want to conquer China next year. Whatever the answer is, let's say that's the true purpose. They don't have a right to ask. That's a privileged conversation. And the court says, no, it's not. Wow. Ms. Abramson responds, saying, nothing waives it. The court says you've waived it by asking questions of your client as to why he said these things, what the purpose was, why he. Ms. Abramson says, I like slur that all the time, sorry. Ms. Abramson says, we didn't waive his privilege with Mr. Chaliff. He never discussed these things with Mr. Chaliff. The court says if this causes the subject of communications with Chaliff to be brought out, then that's a waiver. Ms. Abramson says, we're saying it doesn't. The court says, okay, well, as I said, I haven't heard your client's answers yet. Ms. Abramson says, we want to talk to our client concerning these privilege matters since we've never been given any notice that the people intended to inquire concerning conversations with Mr. Chaliff. Court says, all right. Well, as I've indicated, the court is sustaining the objection at this point to the previous question, but as to a full explanation of the reasons why the conversation with Dr. Oziel took place on that particular date and the way it occurred and why things were said, the way they were said, and the purpose that was going to be used, the purpose of the taping and why it was done and was going to be, what it was going to be used, what use was going to be made of the tape, all of those are proper for cross examination. Mr. Gessler says, just to finalize my record, and I will shut up on the subject, but I think that any such questions as it pertains to the witness's state of mind as he was advised by counsel does indeed violate the attorney client privilege, which we have not waived up to this point on behalf of Lyle Menendez nor Erik Menendez by what has been proffered so far of this conversation with Dr. Oziel, that any reason given him by Gerald Chaliff as a reason or mixed reason or anything of that nature is in fact still violative and cannot be gone into. And the simple asking of the question was was there any other reason? If Erik then gives the full answer, he's waiving the attorney client privilege without even knowing that it existed at that point. Court says, okay, well, I understand you, but please understand me. By the nature of the answers given so far, I find that as far as the reasons for this meeting and what was to be done with the tape and the purpose of the meeting and the reason why things were said, whether they were reasons generated by Erik or reasons generated by someone else that caused him to do this, and whether this someone else was a lawyer, if it happened to be a lawyer, to the extent that it discloses what otherwise might be regarded as confidential communications, I find there's been no waiver. Mr. Gessler says, if I may analogize, yes, okay. I was just making sure I was reading the right word. If I may analogize, I see no difference in this as to Mr. Khan asking the witness on the stand, did your attorney tell you to avoid a certain subject on direct or on cross, which I think would clearly be violative of his attorney-client privilege, even though the witness has been testifying for a week. I see no difference in then asking what a different attorney told him or advised him in a different proceeding, such as Mr. Chaliff and this particular conference with Dr. Oziel. So I believe the analogy is apt, and respectfully, I would ask the court to reconsider your decisions as to whether there's been a waiver. The court says, okay, I don't find that they're the same point of distinct. What they are, distinguishable and not the same. Therefore, my analysis, I think, is the correct one. I'm willing to stand by it. I'll let you talk to your client if you want to. What a dick. I'm sorry, but he is. I cannot stand Stanley Weisberg. As you can see now we're getting into where he's fixing the trial in favor of the prosecution. Pretty much everything he's going in favor of the prosecution. And making things come in different ways where you're forcing the defense to have to waive attorney-client privilege. Like, what the hell? This is insane. It should not be happening, and they should not be going into this questioning. Any judge, I think, would be like, no, I think it's attorney-client privilege. Let's not get into it. This judge is like, nah, let's do it. Let's go ahead. Let's be unconventional, I guess. Mr. Levin says, just for a minute. Ms. Abramson says, I'd rather not do it in front of the jury. The court says, without the jury present, so we'll get the jury out. The following proceedings were resumed in open court in the presence of the jury. The court says, we have a matter that we will take another moment or two. So we'll ask that you go in the jury room and then we'll have you out. The jury exited the courtroom. And now this is the defendant confers with his lawyers, and then the court says, okay, let's get the jury out. Okay, there was an objection to the previous question. The objection is sustained and the question is stricken. You may proceed. Mr. Khan says, Mr. Menendez, what was your understanding concerning why a tape recording was being made of the conversation that you were going to have on December the 11th with Dr. Oziel? That it was, if we made it, that would make him feel very comfortable and it would no longer be an issue. Him feeling uncomfortable, that he would not go to the police, that it would satisfy him in that regard, and that he also wanted it to reflect back when he, in thinking about things that Lyle and I had told him. What was your understanding concerning why he might need that to think back upon things that you and Lyle told him? Just to reflect back on things that he had told him. He didn't say why. Primarily, the tape was made to satisfy him. It's what he wanted. And that's what we were going to agree to give. That was the primary reason. Is that correct? Right. Was there a secondary reason? Well, he brought up the fact that in thinking about why we had done it, that he wanted to have our words memorialized, and that was another reason he gave, aside from the fact that it was make to make him feel very comfortable and that he would no longer need to go to the police. I feel like they were blackmailed into making this tape. Why did he want your word memorialized? Objection, calls for speculation, overruled. For exactly that. So I remember him saying that the tape would make him feel more comfortable and settle that issue, and it also would be nice to have so that he could think back. Not just have to think back, but could listen to it again and again. Was it also your understanding that there was some legal purpose for the recording to be made? There was. There was no legal. There was legal purpose for the recordings to be made. There was no legal. No legal. Oh my God. There was no legal purpose. There was. You had no discussions that day with anyone concerning a legal purpose for that recording being made. Objection, Your Honor. Rephrase the question, please, says the court. Yes, says Mr. Khan. Did you have any indication from Dr. Oziel that there might be a legal purpose for that tape recording to be made? Dr. Oziel thought there might be a legal purpose for the. No. And so you were not aware of any legal purpose whatsoever for that recording to be made when it was made on December 11th of 1989. Is that your testimony? Objection, asked and answered. Overruled. My testimony is that the only thing legal that I was concerned about was making sure that the session was privileged, that the tape would never fall into anyone else's hands once we gave it to Dr. Oziel, that the tape would not go to the police, which it then did because he shared it with Judalon Smith and she took it to the police. Mr. Khan says, did you have an understanding that there may be some use for that tape recording someday in court? I don't know why that tape would be used in court. I'm not telling Dr. Oziel what happened. No, that was not discussed. You had no reason to believe that it would be used in court. What court? My question to you is, did you have any reason whatsoever to believe that someday that recording might be used in a court? No. Do you recall Dr. Oziel making reference to the session or the recording legally protecting you in some way? I think he said that it was not legally protecting us. Is that what it says? Do you recall Dr. Oziel saying, I don't want to have this be something where we're gonna do something that has to do with your, legally protecting you because that's not what we're doing here. The only thing that was I wanted to make sure was legally protecting was that this tape could never fall into anyone else's hands because I knew that would that what we were going to talk about on this tape was not going to be what happened. And I just wanted to make sure that it didn't fall into Detective Zoller's hands, so to speak, that the police could not use it because they didn't have intentions of telling the truth because it's not going to talk about the reasons why. My question to you was, do you recall Dr. Oziel saying to you what I just read to you? I don't recall it. I remember reading it. What was your understanding of why Dr. Oziel was even making reference to this as legally protecting you or not? Mr. Levin says, objection, it would call for speculation. Overruled. Erik says, I don't know why Dr. Oziel said a lot of the things on that tape. He said that. You can ask him why. Call him as a witness. I don't know why he said it. Did you stop him at that point in time and say, Dr. Oziel, why are you even speaking about this recording possibly being used or not being used to legally protect us? I don't understand how the recording could protect me in any way. I don't understand what you're getting at. Was one of your purposes for making that recording, Mr. Menendez, to memorialize the circumstances of the shooting in case it ever needed to be presented on your behalf in a courtroom? That is definitely not why I was making this statement. There's no way. And you did not receive any information from anyone indicating to you that that was one of the purposes? Certainly not any of the reasons that were in my mind that I wanted to make this tape, that it would memorialize what I was saying at the time. I'm not asking you if that was one of your. It's not what happened. It's not what happened at the shooting, so I would never have wanted that. I'm not asking you if that was one of the reasons for you doing it. I'm saying, were you aware that Dr. Oziel may have said that? He might have. He might have said what? He might have said that it's good to have it down on tape, what was happening with the shootings. I don't know. For what purpose? For him, I didn't we weren't talking about legally protecting. Did Dr. Oziel ever indicate that one of the reasons why it might be good to have it down memorialized is that so that someday it could be used on your behalf in a court of law? Used on my behalf in a court of law? No. Correct. There was no such conversations and you had no such understanding. Right. Did you say your attorney, Mr. Chaliff, was there that day? He was there before the session began. Once the session began, he left. And he was the attorney that represented you in a previous criminal matter? Oh, he was the Calabasas robbery guy, the attorney for that. He says, right. And that day, did you go into Oziel's office with him? No. Did you meet him at Oziel's office? Yes. And did you see any conversations between him and Dr. Oziel before you had your conversations with Dr. Oziel? Did I see or Mr. Levin says, objection, Your Honor. Court says, well, it's vague as to what is meant by C, sustained. Mr. Khan says, were you aware of any conversations between your attorney, Jerry Chaliff, and Dr. Oziel before you began to have this tape recorded session with Dr. Oziel? Jerry Chaliff wasn't there for more than 10 minutes. He wasn't there when these things were being said. At the time that Mr. Chaliff was there, both you and your brother Lyle were there? Yes. And what was he doing during that time period? Yeah. Objection, Your Honor. The court says, what was who doing? Mr. Chaliff, says Mr. Khan. During what time period? During the time period that you saw Jerry Chaliff there while you and your brother were there. Overruled. The witness says he was sitting in the chair. Mr. Khan says, and was he conversing with anyone? Your Honor, we'd asked to approach. Overruled. You can answer that, yes or no. Witness says yes. Mr. Khan says, was he conversing with Dr. Oziel? Your Honor, we'd asked to approach. The request is denied. You can answer this yes or no. The witness says yes. Were you listening to that conversation? Yes. And was Lyle Menendez present as you were listening to that conversation? He was. During that conversation, was there any discussion about this tape recording possibly being used in the future in a court of law on your behalf? Ms. Abramson says, "Objection, Your Honor. Ask to approach." The court says, "All right, we'll have a conversation. To make it easier, we'll have the jury go in the jury room." And they leave. And now we're going to have arguments. Ms. Abramson says, "Your Honor, I believe this entire line of questioning violates my client's attorney-client privilege in the following regard. The prosecution wants to raise the inference that the tape was made for a legal purpose." The court says, "For what?" Ms. Abramson says, "Excuse me?" The court says, "I didn't hear what you said. For a legal or illegal purpose." Ms. Abramson says, "Legal. I mean, legal in the sense for litigation purposes, I think is a more correct way of saying it. And they want to be able to get up at the end of the case and say they weren't lying on this tape, although why they'd want to say that, I'm not sure. But they want to say they weren't lying on this tape because it was made for litigation purposes unless you were telling the truth or unless you wanted people to believe what was on it. And all they're going to ever have to support that because of what the court has now allowed them to ask about is the presence of an attorney for 10 minutes some hours before this particular tape was made. This is completely improper. If I was her, I'd be raging right now, which I think she is. Um Therefore, they are using the fact that my client had an attorney against him in order to raise a negative inference, an inference to impeach him when he says this tape was made as a consequence of Dr. Oziel's blackmail. Okay, good. She sees it as blackmail too. And I think that use of the presence of an attorney is violative of the Sixth Amendment. And although I don't have the citation here, I would cite to the court a case that I'm familiar with because at one point I represented the client, and that's People versus Schindler. And that was a case in which a woman was accused of killing her husband, in which the husband that she killed had previously killed a previous wife, in which attorney Paul Garagos was the deputy. That's not Mark Garagos, Paul Garagos, was the deputy district attorney who prosecuted the dead victim husband for killing the previous wife. And in the course of Mr. Schindler's first trial, the prosecution was able to elicit that she called Mr. Garagos, who was then in private practice, to represent her, and that the choice of Mr. Garagos as her attorney because he had previously prosecuted the victim in that case, showed a certain acuity of mind on her part that belied her defense that she was in a fugue state at the time of the killing and immediately thereafter. And the California Supreme Court ruled that that use of an attorney to use someone having an attorney or choosing an attorney or contacting an attorney against them was a violation on their Sixth Amendment right to counsel. So although we're not talking specifically about the privileged communications, I think that that case is analogous to what's being elicited here. The fact that a lawyer was there raising an inference that this tape was made for litigation purposes, I think is improper. He had a right for a lawyer to be there for whatever reason. The court says, well, if the tape was made or one of the purposes of making the tape was for litigation purposes, Ms. Abramson says, he denied that. He said it was not made for that purpose. The court says, aren't the people allowed? Ms. Abramson says the only way now to prove it, what he's going puppy playtime right now. Hold on. Okay, sorry, I don't know where I left off. She says, I think it's improper. He had a right for a lawyer to be there for whatever reason. The court says, well, if the tape was made or one of the purposes of making the tape was for litigation purposes, Ms. Abramson says he denied that. He said it was not made for that purpose. The court says, aren't the people allowed? Ms. Abramson says the only way to now prove it, what he's going to call the lawyer who has a privilege to assert, to find out if the lawyers we'd offer to prove Mr. Chaliff would say he had no idea a tape was being made, and therefore what they are not in a position to prove that this tape was being made for a litigation purpose. And so they simply want to raise the inference. My client has already said, Mr. Menendez has already said, this tape was not being made for a litigation purpose, and raising the specter that the lawyer was there doesn't do anything but raise a false inference. She's absolutely right. It does. And he keeps asking this question over and over again, like he does, and it gets in the jury's minds, and they think that, oh, this was made for legal purposes then. Mr. Gessler says, I join in the objections on behalf of Lyle Menendez, Your Honor, for the same reasons stated earlier in the first bench conference and by Ms. Abramson. He was present for this 10-minute conversation, stands on equal footing here, and asserts his own privilege at this time. Again, Ms. Abramson says, moreover, the last question was to repeat this conversation, which is a privileged conversation. The court says, all right, the focus should be on whether the conversation related to, Ms. Abramson says, the making of a tape. The court says, relating to whether this tape was being made for litigation purposes, which is what you're focused on. Is that correct, Mr. Khan? Yes, Your Honor. In that regard, I don't find that this is a violation of an attorney-client privilege. Wow. Just wow. I think just about anybody looking at this would think that this is a bit improper to be doing. If you're trying not to be biased in any way, you would think maybe you shouldn't be bringing up this other lawyer and making an inference that it was for legal purposes when that's not why that guy was there. This was, as I said, at the sidebar conference we had earlier, raised by the defense when the defendant explained his reasons for the making of the tape and his state of mind as to why he said the things he said, the way he said them, and what use is going to be made of the tape. And it would constitute a waiver of any attorney-client privilege as to communications relating to why that tape was being made. Ms. Abramson says, well, if that's what the litigation is, rather than, but that's not what the question was. The question asked for the conversation. The court says, as I said in my remarks to Mr. Khan, the question could be more appropriately directed to that. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. They confer with the defendant again, and now the court says, okay, counsel have conferred with the client. Let's have the jury out. Court says, okay, the jury is back. You may continue. The objection is sustained to the last question. The question is stricken. Your next question, please. Mr. Khan says, did you hear a conversation between Mr. Chaliff and Dr. Oziel regarding a specific purpose to use a tape recording in litigation? No. But that question, it makes an inference that there was a conversation about it. So improper. Was there discussion? Did you hear any conversation between them concerning litigation? No. Or use of something in a court of law? No. After Mr. Chaliff and Dr. Oziel finished speaking, did Mr. Chaliff leave? Yes. After he left, did you then begin your session with Dr. Oziel? In a sense, yes. What do you mean in a sense? Well, I don't know what you mean by session. I would rather not use the word. We began talking to Dr. Oziel about many different things, and within an hour of that, he put in the first tape. And when Dr. Oziel used the phrase during that conversation about the session legally protecting you, did you have any idea what he was referring to? Objection misstates what Dr. Oziel said. Court says, okay, why don't you quote the exact words? This is so improper. Mr. Khan says, when Dr. Oziel made reference to the phrase legally protecting you being in the sentence, I don't want to have this be something where we're doing something that has to do with your, legally protecting you, because that's not what we're doing here. What do you understand Dr. Oziel to be referring to by the term legally protecting? The only thing I understood it to be was aware of his making sure, asking that this tape could ever be used, was privileged, asking if I gave this tape to Dr. Oziel, would it ever be allowed to, was it confidential? And I don't remember him specifically saying legally protecting. Isn't it true, Mr. Menendez, that in the December 11th session with Dr. Oziel, you never mentioned fear of your parents or molestation because those incidents never occurred? No, they occurred. Let me ask you some questions about that session now. Do you recall that in the recording that we was played here in court, you made a statement to Dr. Oziel in which you analogized your family situation to the Kennedy family, right? Can you tell us what the purpose of that analogy was? We were just talking about relationships in general, and I believe I was talking about how John F. Kennedy's father told Bobby Kennedy, no, told John Kennedy when he was president to make his brother attorney general, and just talking about types of personalities. What was the analogy to your family? Just that my brother was like that type of a person that reminded me of my father. Did you tell Dr. Oziel that we thought that when we became the senator or when we made hundreds of millions of dollars, it would all be because my father was this incredible man and we were just pushed, too pushed? I think it says too privileged. And is that what you feel at the time that if you were to succeed by becoming a senator and make hundreds of millions of dollars, it would be because you were privileged? Right. That it would be that what we did in our life would stem from our father and that we were very privileged in that sense. Your Honor, I'd ask to approach. Sorry, but I think it's necessary. The court says, all right. Ms. Abramson says, thank you. The court says, why don't we go to the side? He's not happy about it. Mr. Gessler says, I think we need Terry. Ms. Abramson says, I think we need Terry and Carol, but neither of them wanted to come. The point is, the court knows there's been negotiations up and back about the transcript, and in the prosecution's their last proffer on the transcript, they had the word privileged, not the word pushed. So our concern now is going through this if Mr. Khan is going to be picking out the word he likes best, or the word we've all agreed that even his own co-counsel has agreed is the more appropriate or more accurate word reflected in the transcript. The court says, do you have a finalized version yet? Mr. Gessler says, well, we did have a finalized version with the exception of 4 words in different aspects that are the subject of dispute, which we'll have to submit to the court. Court says, why don't we do this? Get that final version with the corrections, whatever they are, that still have to be made, and everybody have it and give me a copy so that in cross examination tomorrow, if he's referring, are you going to be referring to this in detail? Mr. Khan says, I will be referring to the transcript in detail, but I don't know that I'm going to be referring to anything that's in issue. The court says, well, my concern is that if you do, then we're going to end up with another one of these disputes, and there is a version that is almost completely agreed upon, then you can all use it and we won't have these disputes unless it gets to those 4 points. Ms. Abramson says, what we can do is give Mr. Khan right now the final version that shows which ones are still in dispute so he can. Mr. Gusser says, I thought we gave it to Carol. Carol's got it, says Ms. Abramson. The court says if you have a version that you can use right now, Mr. Khan, or you need time to digest it until tomorrow morning. Ms. Abramson says pushed was gone a long time ago. So they used an old version of this transcript, and now Ms. Abramson's like, we need the right version before we go any further. Mr. Khan says, we can work with this. The court says they have another one they claim is agreed upon. Ms. Tari now enters, and she says the word pushed, according to my conversation with Ms. Nahara, was a mistake, and the people's version is privileged, not pushed. We agreed upon that several weeks ago. Mr. Gessler says, what we're talking about is giving the judge the version. The court says, everybody have it. Mr. Gessler says, except for the 4 areas you have given in to Ms. Nahara. Not yet, says Ms. Towery. Well, let's do that. We'll take our break today so you can have it so your examination won't be interrupted by this sort of thing. Mr. Gusser says, we would like to give to the court also the one with the 4 disputed words so that if Mr. Khan wants to cross-examine on one of those lines or Mr. Levin wants to redirect on one of those lines, that we have the court's final version as to those disputes. Ms. Abramson says, can we cue up the tape? The court says, if you can cue up the tape, for those disputed portions. Ms. Towery says, I don't know if you can tell. The court says, if they're unintelligible. Ms. Abramson says, then they should be unintelligible. If no one can tell, it should be little stars. Like asterisks probably. In the transcript if it's like inaudible. The court says, we'll deal with those issues when they arise. Following proceedings were resumed in open court. The court says, okay, what we're going to do is the lawyers for both sides, the defense and the prosecution, have been negotiating over the final version of the transcript of the tape recorded session involving the defendants and Dr. Oziel. There were some disputes as to which version of the transcripts was most accurate, and they've been negotiating back and forth which is appropriate to try to solve those disputes. The version that Mr. Khan is using is not the final version that everybody has pretty much agreed to. There's still a few disputes that they'll ask me to resolve if I can do so by listening to the tape. What I want to do before we continue the cross-examination is at least get Mr. Khan the final version that is up to date, that has been the product of this negotiation, so that we don't have these sort of disputes as to what exactly is on the tape or what was in the transcript, bearing in mind again that the best evidence of the conversation is the tape recording itself. But for the purposes of cross-examination, direct examination, it's often helpful for the lawyers to have the transcript. Why is he telling so much detail? It's often helpful for the lawyers to have the transcript rather than playing the tape recording and finding exactly where on the tape they should stop and play for purposes of questioning. So they want to use the transcript, but I want them to have the final version as best they can before we continue with this examination. So I'll let them do this afternoon, and then we'll continue tomorrow morning with the cross-examination before we go into further examination regarding the conversation on December 11th. So we'll take a recess 10 minutes early today. Woohoo, you get a whole 10 minutes back to yourself. And we'll resume tomorrow at 8:30. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. And we'll ask that you return tomorrow at 8. Court says, okay, we'll be in recess. Mr. Khan says, we have one more thing. In regard to the testimony of Erik Menendez, of course, we do not have a copy of the testimony of Mr. Chaliff concerning the meeting that day, and I think that it was privileged up until this point. However, we would ask at this time. So they did this to get the discovery. They did this to get the testimony of Dr. Chaliff. Chaliff, I don't know. But it wasn't available because it was privileged. So now it's not privileged anymore because the court says it's not for whatever reason, even though I thought that the defense had better arguments, whatever. However, we would ask at this time that in order for us to determine if there is impeachment material to be used against Erik Menendez in that regard, that either the court provide us with a copy of the material, that the court review the material to see if there's any matter of impeachment in there that would be admissible against the defendant. The court says, you're talking about the testimony of Mr. Chaliff or the defendants, or who? Mr. Khan says, the testimony of Mr. Chaliff, Your Honor. Abramson says, we would object, Your Honor. Your objection is what? Well, that testimony was given pursuant to evidence code provisions that allow the privilege holder to present testimony without that testimony ultimately constituting a waiver of the privilege, and we had those hearings in good faith. The attorney-client privilege is an absolute privilege, and the court can't go back later and determine that that's unprivileged, since we would never have offered the testimony if we were running that risk at any time. So I don't think the fact that over our strenuous objection this afternoon, the people were able to elicit the fact that Jerry Chaliff was there and that they got a denial that there was a conversation with Mr. Chaliff there concerning using this tape for litigation purposes, that should allow them to now rummage through Mr. Chaliff's testimony, which was given under those provisions, that it does not constitute a waiver of the privilege in order to assert the privilege by testifying as Mr. Chaliff did. The court says, let me suggest then, without further argument, that the prosecution cite to the court authority for your request that in essence you are asking that the court rule that certain testimony given during a hearing in which the parties to the hearing were under the impression and assurance that the testimony was confidential, but by reason of any testimony that has occurred in this trial, that testimony previously given would no longer be privileged? Mr. Khan says, okay. Court says, if you have any authority for that, either authority for the looking at it or requesting that the court look at it for the purpose of disclosing things to the prosecution. Mr. Khan says, okay. So he has to give him case law as to this is appropriate for you to do that, even though this hearing, this evidence, nothing would have ever come in unless they had the assurance that it would remain under seal, confidential, privileged. The other side couldn't get to it. Court says, all right, and we'll be in recess until tomorrow. Ms. Towery says, Your Honor, before the bailiff says, Your Honor, may I get the jurors out right now? He says, sure. The jury exits. The court says, okay, something else, Ms. Towery? I just wanted to indicate to the court what my notations on the transcript mean, and I've given a copy to Ms. Nahara. To the extent that the prosecution and the defense have agreed to changes in the transcript, I've either stricken through the existing typed words and written above them the words agreed to, or inserted the words with, I don't know what you call that symbol, but it's like a little V. So I can't remember what that's called in editing. To the extent that there's a dispute over words, I've placed the prosecution's version of the word, if such a word exists, in brackets and written the defense version over the top of that word in the space above the word and put a check in the right-hand margin. So I think the only disputed portions of the transcript are at pages 3. I can't bracket if there's the prosecution just omits the words on page 21. Those are all there's 2 disputes at page 21 at lines 1 and 20, and the prosecution version simply omits those words. So that does have a check beside each one of those disputes. Then at page 22, again, there's a dispute at line 20. At page 24, a dispute at line 26. Page 32, a dispute at line 10. I think that's it. The court says, okay, all right, we'll be in recess until tomorrow at 8:30. And at some point, if you, Mr. Khan, feel that you're going to get into these areas that are in dispute and need it resolved ahead of time, then you'll have to provide me with a tape recording set up for that purpose. Mr. Khan says, okay. And they adjourn. So that is the end of the defense's case, part 61. We will continue on Thursday with 62, continuing on with Erik's testimony. He's still on for a few more days, I believe. So we're getting through it though. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. That's the end of this Trial Transcripts Exposed. Thanks for following along with me. Like if you want more, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next time.